But I'm Sam Thompson. This is my wife, Louise.
Hi, everybody.
And from Memphis originally. And we were married, and we've been married 43 years. And I was 2. She's Mormon. But one of her many husbands. But anyway, I met Elvis in '72 and became his friend and worked with him and with Red and Sonny and those guys for 2 or 3 years. And I was a police officer in Memphis. And shall I look at this camera? And then in '76, I quit the sheriff's department. I went full-time for Elvis as his personal bodyguard and ran his security for him at all of his homes and also on the road, his airplanes and all of that until he died. And then I went back to the sheriff's department. And I went to law school at night and became a judge, was a lawyer and a judge at Memphis. And then I had a record company in California. Josh Groban, you know that name? Yeah. He was my artist. Michael Bublé, wow. The Corrs. We had those were my acts. And we had that for 5 years, and we sold our company to Warner Brothers. And I retired and went to Las Vegas, where we live. And I was a judge there for 5 years. Public utilities, solar and wind power, all of that. We regulated all of that. And then I retired and started traveling, talking about Elvis. But I've known Hendrick, what'd you say, '93 was the first time I came to Randers? Yeah. One of the first times I went anywhere, I went here, I think. Well, the first time was Munich, right?
Right.
Yeah. Right. And the second time here. But it's amazing to me, Elvis is dead 38 years. And I was just in Bad Nauheim with Glenn D. Harden and James Burton and Terry Blackwood. And we're sitting around talking and meeting people and answering questions. And afterwards, we're having a drink, and we just sit and say, can you believe that 38 years later, we're still on the road? You know, I mean, we're sort of living the life that Elvis would have liked to live. You know, if he had lived long enough and could have come to Europe. And through Elvis, we get the chance to do this and meet new people and go places. So I'm really grateful. I'm humbled by all of this, and I'm grateful. So thank you all for coming and listening to me tonight, and goodbye. But yeah, one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to me was in Las Vegas. And I was just out there with Elvis. I wasn't even working for him then. It was '73. And I was standing at the edge of a curtain with Billy Stanley, Elvis' stepbrother. And when Elvis walked out on the stage, I was just standing there. You know, I think Red was over there, and Red opened the curtain, and I was just standing there and walked up, and Elvis walks out on the stage. And back in those days, they didn't have the condenser mics. You know, they had the microphones with a long cord. Does everybody understand me when I say okay? So he's out there, that's all right, Mama. Yeah, he's moving across the stage, and this is inside of the Las Vegas Hilton showroom, 1,800 people, you know, full orchestra. And he got to a certain point, and as we say in Memphis, the slack in that chain ran out. Because that microphone, the cord was stiff, and it went bing, and it jerked right out of his hand, flew all the way across the stage, it hit like a boom. And Joe Garcia was the orchestra conductor. He dropped his baton. He looked, the orchestra quit playing, the rhythm section quit playing. Elvis looked around like he thought it was a gunshot. You know, we didn't know. Loud. The audience was horrified. And Elvis walks over and he picks the microphone up and he feels the tension. He takes the cord and does this. All the way to the curtain. He opens the curtain up and the spotlight hits me. He was not happy. So we got bracelets, and like, let's see, Dick was the fox, and Joe Esposito, the bracelet said Jaws, because he was fat in the jaws, and Elvis's said crazy. Mine said paddlefoot. So that sort of ended my career on stage right there. But Elvis, he loved to mess with you like that. Another embarrassing story, since you want one, is they're asking about Graceland, what it looked like. How many of you have been to Graceland? Several of you have, I know.
Oh, wow.
All of you have.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, you know, when you walk in the door, to your left is the dining room, and the stairway goes up, and there's a landing. And at the top of the landing, there's a door. And there's another, because that door is another stairway that goes down to the kitchen. So Dick Grobe and I were sitting in the kitchen one night, and we're doing the tour sheets ready for the next tour. And I knew where Elvis didn't drink, but Aunt Delta, Vernon's sister, she liked a little nip now and then. And I knew where she kept her bottle. So this was late at night, she'd gone to bed, she liked Jack Daniels. So I went there and found her Jack Daniels, and we put it on the table, and we were drinking Jack Daniels and figuring out, where we would have our security problems and all the next tour, where to get the buses, the limos, all that. And there was a guitar there, so I picked the guitar up, and John Wilkinson, the rhythm guitar player, he's been here, he was teaching me to play the guitar. So there was a song out by Kenny Rogers called Lucille. You picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille, all that. So anyway, the more I drank, the more I was convinced I could sing. And the more Dick drank, he was convinced he could sing better than me. So I started playing that song, and Dick was singing, and I was singing, and suddenly Dick is facing me, and I have my back to that kitchen door, and suddenly Dick quit singing. And I looked at him, and all the blood had drained from his face. So I turned around, and there stood Elvis and my sister Linda. And they said something about hearing somebody kill a cat. So Elvis just shook his head. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, if you'll leave the singing to me, I'll leave the security to you. So we said, okay. The very next tour that we were planning, that we went on, he's on stage, and he does a song, and he says, thank you all very much. You're a wonderful audience. I'd like to bring one of my bodyguards out to sing. And I'm standing behind the curtain, and Lamar Fike had the lights. And I'm standing there because he had it all set up, and the light goes this way and hits me. And my eyes were this big, and I'm like trying to get out. And he did that several times. In fact, there's some album out there, I don't know which one it is, that says, I'd like to bring one of my bodyguards out to sing for you. And then you can hear him say, sit down, Sam. So he would do that to me. But we had a lot of fun. We had water fights on stage. Have any of you seen the videos of those? Yeah, they were great. But at first it started out with just Elvis would take a cup of water, and Charlie would give it to him, and he'd throw it on Charlie. And then Charlie would, next time he came out, Charlie would throw the water on him. Very innocent. So the next night, Charlie brought a water gun, a little pistol. And so when Elvis threw the water on him, he squirt the water gun on him. That's great. The next night, Elvis brings a gun with one of those pump things, sitting there with water. And he's like, bam, bam, everybody. And Jerry Sheff was our bass player. And he's shooting everybody, and turns around and shoots Jerry Sheff. And when that water hit that bass that was plugged in, it grounded the bass, and a blue flame that far shot up. And Jerry threw his arms up, and Elvis thought he'd killed him right there on the stage. I killed my bass player right here in front of all these people. That was the end of the water fights. And so Elvis said, okay, no more water fights after that. But that's usually the way it went, whenever he got that far, then Elvis called a halt to it. But I stayed with Elvis until '77, and we went with Elvis to Hawaii in March of '77 on the last vacation, and my wife was 8 months pregnant in March of '77, and the doctor didn't want her to fly, but we were flying on a private plane to Lisa Marie, and Tish Henley was the nurse, and Dr. Nick was there, and so they attended to her. And while we were there in Hawaii, we had a little party at the house in Kailua. We were just telling this story, and all of the ladies were up and they were dancing with the guys, and my wife was pregnant, so I'm sitting on the sofa with her, and Elvis comes over and he says, you have to get up and dance with me. So they got up and they slow danced. They had a nice dance. So my daughter was born in April, so we tell her she danced with Elvis. She just didn't know it.
Yeah, she loves music.
Yeah. But my first daughter was born in '74, and Elvis came to the hospital, which is kind of a cute story. She had been in labor all day long. The baby was born at 12:11. Is that right?
That's right.
It's important for you fathers to remember this. And your anniversary. But anyway, the child was born at 12:11, and so we were there, and we're in the room, and Linda had been there and gone back, and been there and gone back. And so finally, when she knew the baby was being born, she got Elvis, and I was sitting in the room with Louise, It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I hear this noise in the hallway, and I open the door and I look down. Here's Elvis with a fringe, you know, the rainbow fringe jacket, sunglasses, French, you know, little Greek fisherman cap kind of thing, Tipperillo, walking down the hallway with Linda and Red and Sonny and a whole entourage. And behind him are the doctors and the nurses. They're following him. And he goes to each door. He didn't know where she was. He'd open the door and say, "Louise," and you can hear some woman go, "Oh my God, it's Elvis!" He would shut the door and keep walking. And a few minutes later, that door would fly open, and it'd be a woman, you know, holding the gown. So it was growing. It was, exponentially.
Middle of the night, okay.
Middle of the night, yeah. I mean, it was about to be a riot there, you know. So finally, I do this, and I wave, and Sonny waves back at me, and I say, "Do this." So they come down, and they come in, and they want to see Louise. And of course, she's like, right. They gave her the
Been in
good
labor
stuff.
for 22 hours. Okay.
They gave her the good stuff. So she's sort of like, but anyway, they're hugging her, and he wants to see the baby. Well, you know, the nurseries, you ladies that have had babies, you know, the nursery at the hospital, they close, right? After a certain hour. You can't see them anytime you want. But it was Elvis. So they went and got the baby, you know, and he's doing this and everything. And so he kisses the baby and all that and gives it back. And she was in a semi-private room. You know, it's a room with the divider between the two beds. And the lady was in the bed next to her, sedated. And has she had her baby? She had her baby, yeah. And so she goes over, Elvis goes over, you know, pulls the curtain. "How are you tonight?" "Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm hallucinating. I think it's Elvis." So he kisses her and all like that. And then they leave. And then the next day, she wakes up. They bring breakfast to her. They wake you up to give you breakfast, right? So they wake you up for her breakfast. And Louise is sitting there next to the lady. And she looks, what did she say to you?
She said, I dreamed, I think I dreamed, that Elvis Presley was in the room with me.
She said, "I had the most wonderful
dream." I said, "It's true. It was, you know, sorry."
I'm not sure she believed you.
I don't either.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
whole entourage was in here, and she said, "It was a wonderful dream."
You like it? But we found out that Elvis had been in the labor room before he got there because he was looking for her. And the ladies were in there, you know, wailing. He walked up.
You know what it's like, right? Everybody.
And he had a pen, and they said, "Sign my belly," and he was signing their, you know, their Starbucks. I mean, that's not going to last, right? But he had worked his way all the way through. And then when our second daughter was born in 77, all the nurses, you know, she was in this little semi-private room with the curtain in 74. In 77, same hospital, she had a big suite. And they all said, "Is Elvis coming back?"
Of course, he was already on tour, right? He's gone.
Yeah.
No.
I was supposed to be on tour, and I said, I have to, you know, I have to not be on tour because I have to wait for my wife's having a baby. And Elvis was not that kind of guy, you know. It's like, well, you know, if she has a baby, you can go back. I said, "No, it's not going to work that way." So I had to wait. And I guess I was home about 3 days. I got the baby home, got her there, and then I went to tour. So it was that kind of a life. Yeah. But all in all, it was good. And when Elvis died, I went back to the sheriff's department. I was in charge. Dick Grove and the other bodyguard were in charge of the funeral. Of course, Vernon Presley was really the person who designed the funeral and what it was going to be. But he was in such bad shape that we had to help him quite a bit. And Louise and I were in the third car back from the hearse at the funeral. And it is true that when we took Elvis's body out of the front of Graceland, Elvis loved Graceland. He didn't really like to leave. That was his home. And Elvis would always tell us, you know, "I don't know if there's something else, another dimension or not, but if there is, I'll find a way to let you guys know." So we said, yeah, you know. We kind of thought that's the Larry Geller thing, right? But we didn't know. So as we're coming out the front door with the casket, and I wasn't a pallbearer, but I had to help with the casket out the front door because it was so heavy. And just as we cleared the front door, a branch about 30 feet up on one of those big oak trees in Graceland, it broke. And it sounded like a shotgun. It just like snapped. And it fell all the way down and smashed right behind the hearse. they had to move the wood away to get the body in the hearse. And we just stood there for a second, and Lamar Fikes said, "Well, I guess you just had to have the last word, didn't you?" And that's true. That's true. So, you know, I don't know if he sent us a signal or not, but he hated leaving home, and that was the last thing that happened. And then that was in, of course, August the 18th of 77, and I went to the Sheriff's Department, and in October of that year is when Vernon wanted to move Gladys and Elvis back to Graceland from Forest Hill. Forest Hill was going to sue Graceland because the fans were coming there by the thousands and chipping away at the mausoleum and damaging things. So they got permission to have a cemetery there, which is why it's open. I think Ditcha was saying in the mornings for 1 hour, early in the morning at Graceland, you can go free. That's because in Tennessee, the state law is if you have a cemetery, you have to have an hour a day that the general public can go free. And that is a cemetery. The rest of the time they can charge. But we moved the bodies at night in October. And I was there when they disinterred Gladys and Elvis, and we put them in hearses, and we took them to Graceland and buried them. And that was sort of the final chapter for me. I really, there's times in your life when you really sort of feel that chapter closed. We all have it. You know, something happens and you say, okay, that's it. You know, that part of my life is over. And it never really hit me until that night. And after we reburied them in Graceland, I didn't go back for many years. I've only been back a few times since then, but that was one of the last times that I was there. So, questions, comments, criticisms? You know, I do. I was never. I don't mean to be blasphemous here, but I wasn't an Elvis music fan. I grew up in the 60s. I listened to the Rolling Stones, the Byrds, the Beatles, Temptations, Motown, Four Tops. That was my music, R&B. So I didn't really listen to a lot of Elvis's music. So when my sister started dating Elvis, I wasn't so sure I liked him to begin with. He was older than her. He'd been married, you know, and I'm thinking he's this rock and roll star. He's just going to break her heart, you know. So kind of stand off a little bit like that. But then after we met him, I tell people I became a fan of him as a person. I got to know him. You know, we met in November of '72. I went to Stax in December of '72 and watched him record. And he bought us a home in March of '73 next to Graceland. And he recorded, there's a CD called Made in Memphis that he recorded tracks at my house in November of '73. And, you know, so it was like a family kind of thing. So we didn't sit around and talk about his music or listen to his music. We just talked about things that you would talk about with a close friend or a relative. So I became a fan of him as a person. And then when I started traveling a lot with him and listening to music, suddenly, you know, because I was security, so I was mostly watching you. I wasn't watching Elvis's show or listening to Elvis, I was watching the crowd. I was looking for doing threat assessments and exits and problems that existed. All the pictures you see, mostly of me, it's Elvis is performing and I'm looking at the crowd. I'm watching for any problems. So I wasn't listening to him. And then at some point during that time, I began to realize this guy's pretty good. You know, and I started listening, and yeah, I'm an Elvis fan now. I'm a fan of his music now. And I wished I'd been back then. I paid more attention to it. But I do. Every now and then I have Sirius Radio, and I have 19 on my calendar there, and I'll pop it on. That's generally the first thing that comes on. I listen to some of that. I always listen. When is George Klein? On Fridays?
Friday, yeah.
Well, Friday in the afternoon. The time change messes me up sometimes, but I always listen for George. But yeah, I listen to him.
Did Elvis ever bought you a Cadillac?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he bought us. It was 73? So
That's
the
when we brought my younger daughter home from the hospital in.
white Coupe de Ville.
Yep.
And crazy story, but I was working for the Sheriff's Department, and you know, I wasn't working for Elvis, and he buys me a Cadillac, and even back then, gas was whatever it was, 30 cents a gallon cheap. I couldn't afford the gas. So it was such a big car, you know? So I drove it for a while, and I went to Elvis, I said, Elvis, I feel so terrible, but I can't even afford to drive that. He asked me, he said, why don't you ever drive that Cadillac up here? Because I was driving like a little decent Datsun
pickup.
And I'm driving, he said, you're too big for that. Why don't you drive that Cadillac I gave you? Well, it's pretty expensive, Elvis, to put gas in that car. And I said, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to have to sell it. He said, I don't care, sell it. He said, if I give it to you, you can do anything you want to with it. So I put it, this is a terrible story. I put in an ad in the paper, Cadillac for sale, white coupe de ville, one owner. I still had the paperwork where it was in Elvis Presley's name. But I didn't know, I was a kid. So I sell the Cadillac for like $1,700.
Which was a lot of money back then.
Well, back then that was a lot of money. It was a used car, right? So I sold it, just a used car. And this guy, I never told him it belonged to Elvis. He never knew. I sold it. It's out there someplace. And we could find that Cadillac and buy it back. We could make a lot of money.
Count me in.
So some guy's driving a Cadillac out there, a coupe de ville that belonged to Elvis, he doesn't know it, if it's still out there. So don't come to me for financial advice, right? The other thing I did is Elvis gave me the last guitar he ever played, June of '77, Indianapolis, Indiana, Market Square Arena. He did a show we filmed, and I was playing the guitar, and he knew it. So after the concert, he gave me the Martin. We got back to Graceland, and I was talking to him, and he was playing the same guitar he had on stage. And he said, "I'm going to give you this guitar. You need a good guitar to learn on." And this is a Martin D40 Dreadnought guitar, and on the back of it is plastic residue because CBS TV was filming us, the hot lights. And it melted the belt buckle he had on. And so the back of the guitar had the melted plastic from his belt. And he gives me the guitar, and I thank him. And this is like July maybe, He's dead 1 month later, or less. So I go to Vernon, his father, and I say, look, Elvis, and Vernon knew he gave me the guitar, and I said, I want to authenticate this. So Vernon gives me the letter. I contact the Martin Guitar Company. They give me the bill of sale. The serial number matches everything. There's photographs of Elvis on stage with it. It is the real thing. So I put it back, and I think maybe one day it'll be worth something. And I go to law school. And about halfway through law school, I run out of money. And I'm thinking I'm going to have to drop out of law school. And the National Enquirer, you know about them over here? Yeah. They contact me. And they say, we've been looking for this guitar. We knew it existed, and we found out you have it. And we want to buy it from you. And I said, okay. Now, this was like an $800 guitar. They said, we'll give you $8,000. I went, great. Here's the guitar. They give me $8,000. So they give me the money. I pay for law school. I graduate from law school. So I tell everybody Elvis put me through law school. He didn't know it, but he did. Years go by. I'm a judge in Memphis. Phone rings one day. Hello, Judge, you don't know me, but my name is so-and-so, and I own a restaurant in Cincinnati. And that guitar that you sold to the National Enquirer, they had a lottery. Well, I bought it from the lady who won it. And I want you to come to Cincinnati, and I want you to, authenticate it. And I said, okay. And so I went to there, and they have a big case there with all of my stuff, Vernon's letters, everything I had, plus the pictures. It's in a glass case. And I said, yeah, that's it. I said, listen, do you mind if I ask you what you paid for it? He said, $250,000. I wanted to kill him. So I'm clearly not a good financial advisor. Henrik is. Yep, Henrik, your money, you will invest it, but not me.
Everybody will tell you never to listen to a lawyer.
That's correct. Don't listen to lawyers. But always hire one. The Lawyers Full Employment Act, right? Yeah.
So you should have keep the guitar. You should have kept it.
I should have kept everything.
Yeah.
We had so much because Elvis would come by our home and just sit and have dinner with us and sit on the sofa, and we'd go to Graceland, and we'd go over there and take my younger daughter, Jennifer. Linda would call and say, can Jennifer come over? She's 2 years old.
They didn't care about us.
Yeah, bring Jennifer over. So we'd come over, and Linda would come down and get Jennifer and go upstairs, and they would sit, Elvis and Linda would sit, and Jennifer's got pictures of her with Elvis and laying in the bed and on the, you know, all the furniture
autographs in her
upstairs.
baby book.
She's got in her baby book all these poems and everything written by Elvis and stuff and signatures. All of that. Where is it? You know?
We have it.
We have some of it, yeah. But he gave us so much, rings, jewelry, you know, cars and everything. But you know, when you're living a life with someone that you don't really view as a superstar, but as a friend and a part of your family, you don't really start collecting stuff like that and taking little pictures. It's sort of tacky, you know what I mean? You just don't do that. And so we didn't do that. And now, of course, we wish we did. But,
You could be a millionaire.
and what's that?
You could be a millionaire.
I think he already is, but that's another
But I can have more millions. There's nothing wrong with that. More millions. That's right.
What made you say yes to work for Elvis? You were a policeman at the time.
Yeah. You know, I really felt a debt of responsibility to him. As I say, in '73, he bought me a home, you know, and you know, when you're a police officer and you're working nights and you're not making much money and your wife's a teacher and you're living in an apartment and someone says, here's a house, it changes your life, you know. So we had that. He bought my parents a house. My mother and father had a house. Vernon lived on Dolan. We lived on Favell. My parents lived on Lear. He bought my sister a house. So right there, you can hit them with rocks. You had his father, my mother and father, my sister, and us. So we were family. You know, he had taken good care of my parents. And when my grandmother died in 1974, he had known her in the Lauderdale courts. So he buried her next to his mother. He paid for it in Forest Hill Cemetery. He was in the hospital. He couldn't come to the funeral, but he had Voice come. Tim Beatty, Donnie Sumner, and Cheryl Nielsen. And they came, he flew them in and they came at the graveside and sang at the funeral. I mean, he did those things for me, for my family. So, you know, and I knew he was having trouble. I knew Red, I knew Sonny really well, and Dave Hebler. And I traveled and worked with them because I would be at the sheriff's department in a squad car. And the radio would say, you know, we were Adam 5, Adam 6, call this dispatcher. So I would stop, no cell phones those days. I'd get a payphone, I'd call the dispatcher, and he'd say, call the sheriff at home. Well, the first time that happened, you know, a deputy, you don't want to hear call the sheriff at home. I'm thinking, who have I arrested? That's his brother-in-law or something, you know, what have I done wrong? And it was Skip Nixon, was the sheriff. And first time I called, I said, this is Patrolman Thompson. He said, let me ask you something. You know Elvis Presley? I went, yes sir, yes sir, Sheriff, I know Elvis. Well, he's just been calling me, and he wants you to go on tour with him. Do you want to go? I said, well, I don't know. He said, okay, you're off duty without pay, and hung up. All I heard was without pay. So, and so I called Graceland. You know, I had the private number up there, and Linda answers the phone. And I'm telling her, she's just laughing about it. And so she's turning around telling Elvis the whole story. And Elvis is laughing. He said, tell him, don't worry about it. So went on that tour. And, you know, on the tour, he gives me a ring. And, you know, and this is the first time I'd gone with Red and Sonny and those guys. And then at the end of the tour, he calls me back and says, you know, I'm giving tour bonuses. And he puts $1,000 in an envelope. I made $600 a month, you know. He puts $1,000 in an envelope and says, here's your bonus. So that was cool. Without pay was okay with me. So I was doing that, you know, for a period of time. And then Red and Sonny were fired with Dave. And when that happened, Elvis called me, and he had talked to me about working for him before, but I had a good gig. I mean, I had a sheriff's department, real job, you know, with medical benefits and a retirement and a paycheck. And then I could go to Elvis and I could get money from him and jewelry and all of that and travel, and then I'd go back to my real job. So it was great. And then he said, look, he said, you know, you don't really have a choice. I need you to work for me. Because he had let Red and Sonny and Dave go, and he was just down to one bodyguard at Dick Grove. So I owed him. And the truth is, I'm glad I did. And I guess down deep, it was probably something I wanted to do. But, you know, having a wife and children, I didn't want to do it and take a risk. But at some point, you know, he just convinced me that it's the thing I should do, and he was right. So what's funny is I went to work for him full time. I gave up my sheriff's commission, and I was so nervous when I went to see the sheriff, and I said, I don't know, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Sheriff, but Elvis wants me to work full time for him, so here's my badge and my commission, and I'm resigning and I'm going to work for Elvis. I hope I'm doing the right thing. And the sheriff sat there and he said, does he need 2 people? He did. And I said, okay, I'm doing the right thing. But I was able, when Elvis died, I was able to go back to work for the sheriff's department. I was the first of the Memphis Mafia, the inner circle, was the first one to leave. He died on the 16th of August, buried him on the 18th, and the 1st of September I was in a uniform working again. So I was the first one to go back.
I heard that Elvis sometimes went out with the police to see things. Is that true, that he was on the back seat of a police car watching what was going on when they made arrests and things?
He would do that. Yeah.
Were you along with him on tour?
No, thank God, no. I'd have been suspended. But I remember one time, I'm thinking, what am I going to buy Elvis for Christmas? And so I talked to him. Well, I mean, what do you get Elvis Presley for Christmas, right? And one year I got him a flashlight. It's at Graceland. It's a big silver one. There's a lithium charge light, and it says, "Merry Christmas, Boss Sam." And it's in Graceland. They move stuff in and out in the exhibits, but it's been there. And I gave him that one year, and one year I gave him another flashlight and things. But I asked him one year, I said, what do you really want? He said, you know what I'd really like? He said he'd been watching that, like Kojak, or you know those TV shows where they drive around and then they put the blue light up, you know. He said, I want one of those. They're called teardrop, you know.
So he went to the police.
Yeah, and I said, Elvis, I don't know, you know, they're supposed to be only for a police officer. Well, that's what I want. Yes, that's what I want.
We bought one.
So I go see Sheriff Nixon, and I said, look, Sheriff, I don't know if you can do this for me, but this is what Elvis Presley wants. And he went, you know, I don't know, man, that's just for police officers. I said, I know that. He said, okay. So he writes a special thing, permission, and I go to the police supply place, and I get a blue light teardrop with the magnet on the bottom and everything, and I have to give them special papers, and they say, okay, and I sign for it, and I give it to Elvis. He was so happy. This is exactly what I want. About a week later, the sheriff calls me in. And he says, listen, he said, you know that blue light we gave Elvis? I said, yeah. He said, well, he wants a ticket book. Apparently Elvis had it on the studs and he was pulling people over. He would be driving around Memphis, he'd see somebody doing something, he'd put the blue light and pull them over. Now, can you imagine if you're driving in Memphis and you get pulled over and Elvis Presley walks up? Hey man, let me see your license. And so he wanted a ticket book, and the sheriff said, I can't give him a ticket book, you know, because if you write a ticket, you got to go to court. And I said, well, give him a. So they have these things called courtesy tickets, which aren't real tickets. Instead of the officer saying, well, I'm not giving you a ticket, just slow down. Verbally, well, they would write it, and it meant nothing. It meant nothing. So Elvis had a whole book of courtesy tickets. I gave him those, and he never knew they weren't real tickets, and he would stop people and write them a ticket. So someplace out there, there's Elvis, they have Elvis autographs with a ticket. Now that'd be worth something. I don't know why those haven't turned up.
I'd want to speed suddenly.
Yeah, but he would stop people on the side of the road and give them a ticket like that. So, but he loved police work, and he told me
the story where he stopped the fight.
in Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah. He told me one time if he hadn't been able to do what he did, he wanted to be a cop. I mean, that's just what he wanted to do. We were in Madison, Wisconsin, and this was in '77. And Elvis was bullied as a kid, and he had bad complexion and poor clothes, and I think he got beat up a couple times and pushed around. So he hated bullies, which is really part and parcel with the Red and Sunny thing. You know, he just couldn't take that when you start pushing people around. But we were driving from the venue in Madison, Wisconsin, to the plane. This is 1 o'clock in the morning after a show. Elvis is in full regalia, jumpsuit, you know, or stage suits, rhinestones, towel around his neck, sunglasses, and I'm in the back seat with him and Joe Esposito. In the front seat's Dick Grove and the chief of police and the limo driver. We pull up to a stoplight, and before anyone can say anything, Elvis yells, "Stop the car!" Well, the limo driver went, and Elvis reached over me and popped the door open and jumped out while the car was still moving. And those stage boots that he wore, those white, they were never meant to hit the ground at 5 miles an hour. And he hit that pavement and slid all the way up. And what he had seen was a fight. And he had seen it before anybody else did. And there were these two guys that were beating up the gas station attendant. It turns out it was over a girl. But nobody knew that. But Elvis saw that they had this guy over a car and they were banging on that head a little bit. So Elvis saw that, and he jumped out. So he comes up, he slides all the way up to the full karate stage. He says something like, "Come on, I'll whip both of you guys." And by this time, we're all piling out of the car, and the cops are pulling their guns, and these guys get up and they look at this guy like, Superman or something, and they don't know what's going on, so they square up, they're ready to fight Elvis, and they're like all this, and all of a sudden the big one goes, "Aren't you Elvis Presley?" And Elvis goes, "Well, yes, I am." It was the weirdest thing. So we're all like surrounding them, with guns and stuff, and they're doing this, "Put your guns down," with the cops. And sure enough, they stand there and they, "Okay, we got an autograph, we got our picture made," and somebody gets a camera, and here's these, and they still got blood on their nose, and they're like this now, with Elvis, and they're taking pictures, and Elvis says, "Make sure all of them get scars." So I all got scars, all of them got an autograph. We get back in the car, and we drive back, and I'm thinking that's the most surreal thing that's ever happened to me, Andy Warhol stuff, right? So I'm driving back, and I look through the mirror, the glass in the back of the car, and here's these three guys standing there with pieces of paper going. And that's true. I didn't make any of that up. I probably didn't do it justice, but that incident happened, and the next day it was in the Madison, Wisconsin newspaper that somebody had been there following us and took pictures of it, and it was in the newspaper. And years later, I had a police officer, can't call his name right now, that was there in one of the chase cars, and he wrote a book. He wrote a book about the things he had done as a police officer, and he wanted to write about that incident. So he wrote a big story in a book about that. But it's kind of anybody ever heard that story before? That's a true story. Yeah, he did do that.
Of course he did.
Yeah, I have a little question. I have read in a magazine I bought in, I think it was from Hawaii, I bought it in. There stands something about Elvis was helping a person in a burning car. Have you heard about something about helping a person when the car was going in flames?
So many stories about Elvis,
Yes.
that he delivered babies and saved people from burning buildings and, fly like Superman. I like to, when I talk about Elvis, I always say it's kind of an answer to that question because, it's a myth. So much is not known about Elvis. And people think of him as some sort of a superhero, In fact, he made that speech, I think, one time, like when I was a boy in the comic books, I was the hero of every comic book. And I think he kind of thought like he had become that, in his life. But I tell people, I said, there's Elvis the icon. There's Elvis the entertainer, the Elvis that you see on stage. But the guy that I miss is the guy that had mustard on his pajamas. Now, not that he really did, but the guy that I would see at Graceland, who would be in his pajamas, and his hair all messed up, and would just sit up and talk all night long. That guy. And he was just a human being. He was fallible like the rest of us, and really, Elvis had great talent, he was a great person, but he was a human being. And people forget that sometimes. They hold him to a higher standard, And human beings have problems. They're fallible. Sometimes they get involved with prescription narcotics, or they get involved with alcohol, or they make mistakes. So Elvis made mistakes like everybody else. He was a human being. And I try to emphasize that when I talk about him, because that's the guy that I really knew. I didn't really know that guy on the stage. That was for public consumption. Because when I don't have any with me, but I've got a couple of pictures of me bringing Elvis up back of the stage, and he would have his head down, you know, just quiet. But the minute I opened that curtain and he stepped out, he became somebody else. Because that was his stage presence. And he commanded that stage, you know. But that wasn't Elvis. That was the entertainer. And he told us one night, I remember Linda, and this is Linda's, my sister's story, but he was talking about being lonely. And she said, well, Elvis, how can you be lonely? You're loved all over the world. And he told her, he said, well, they love who they see on that stage. They love Elvis Presley. They don't know me. And that's kind of the way he felt, you know, because he had these two lives. And he could be Elvis on the stage, and that's what the world knew. But the private guy behind that, he couldn't really get to know a lot of people. And I think ultimately that led to a lot of bad decisions that he made in his life. Because he pulled in, you know. He got to the point where he didn't have a lot of people he could talk to and trust, which is sad. It's sad, yeah.
Can I ask you why Linda left him, and did you ever confront him with his prescription drug abuse?
Yeah, I can answer both of those. But turn the air conditioner on first. Can't you open a window in this place? What's wrong?
No, we're German.
Sorry, folks. Linda left him in November of 1976. We were playing the Cow Palace. They had been arguing over his continued use of prescription drugs, pills. And it was getting to be a real problem. And they had fought quite a bit. And I was working full-time for Elvis then. And so they had this huge fight, and she flew back to Los Angeles from San Francisco. And she never saw him again. And that was November '76. And then after that, he began dating Ginger Alden, but he dated other girls too. Alicia Keys, who was Alicia Kerwin, who was not Alicia Keys.
I don't think she's around then.
Alicia Kerwin was a bank teller that Elvis had bought cars for. So there are many, many different girls that Elvis began to date after that. But he also dated a lot of girls while he was with Linda. And he dated girls while he was with Priscilla. Elvis was not monogamous. He was truly a woman's, a woman's man. He loved women, and he wasn't faithful. I'm sorry, but Elvis was not faithful to women. And it was the generation he was in, you know, it'd be like, well, she's married, but I'm not. That's the way he looked at things. So he always had girls around, and Linda knew that. And it just got to be a point where between the pills and the other girls around, and Linda wanted to get married. She was young. She had in her head, you know, the little house with a picket fence and the roses, and that's not Elvis. And and he was married once, and there are varying stories about why he married and did he want to get married and all of that to Priscilla, but he did get married, and he got divorced, and he didn't want to be married. So they broke up. And when they broke up, that put me in a pretty awkward position, because I'm Linda's brother. And shortly thereafter, you know, he started dating Ginger Alden. And I remember he called me in, and I thought, okay, he's going to fire me, you know. And before he could say anything, I said, look, you know, my position is a position of trust. I carry my resignation in breast coat pocket. So if I'm making you uncomfortable or the people around you uncomfortable, you can have my resignation anytime you want it. No harm, no foul. And he laughed. He thought that was great. He said, no. He said, I called to tell you that I want you to stay. He said, because he mentioned Red and Sonny in the book and felt betrayed and all of that. And he said, I need somebody I can rely on, I can trust. And I felt really honored that he said that about me, but he wanted me to stay. So we embraced, and I stayed. And a little while later, when he was dating Ginger, he calls me up and he says, Ginger's brother is a fireman in Memphis, and he's going to go on the next tour, and I want you to show him the ropes. And I went, okay. And I said, just be straight with me, Elvis. Am I training my replacement? You know, I mean, he's her brother. I was Linda. You know, he said, no. But you know, he calls me and he says, you know, show Ginger's brother the ropes. And I said, am I going to train my replacement? He smiled. He said, you'll be here long after they're gone. And I said, okay. I just took it at that. But the truth is, I was getting ready to leave on my own. I wanted to go to law school, and I wanted to do what Jerry Schilling had done. And I talked to Jerry about it. He told me how to approach Elvis with it, that I wanted to go and go back to the sheriff's department, still live in Memphis, go to law school, and be friends with Elvis, but not work full time for him. And so I was getting ready to do that anyway when he died, and I forgot the second question you mentioned.
But did you ever confront him?
Yes.
With,
And he fired me.
Yeah?
In March of '77, we were in Hawaii, and Larry Geller and Ed Parker and I were with Elvis, and they were talking to him about getting off the pills, and Ed was saying, move to Hawaii, I'll get you a little house like this, nobody will know you're here, you drink fruit juices and exercise, and take about a year off and get this out of your system. And he said, I'm going to do that. That's great. And he told us he's going to do that. And so we got back in April, just before the next tour. I was at Graceland. I went upstairs to talk to him. He's in the bed. He's, under the influence. And it kind of made me angry, And I reminded him, I said, Elvis, I was really working without a net because Linda was gone, But I just got to the point where this was a lot to deal with. So I just said, look, here a month ago you told us you're going to do this and look at yourself. And he picked up a pill bottle and he threw it at me. And I ducked. I told you this story. And the pills hit the wall behind me and went everywhere. And he said, this is my medicine and I need this and I don't need you. You're fired. And I went, okay. And I went home. And you were teaching school.
Mm-hmm.
And she comes home in the afternoon. She says, what are you doing here? And I said, well, you might want to sit down for this. But the first thing I did when I got home is I called the sheriff. And I said, you've always offered my job back. Well, I'm going to come back to work. I didn't tell him why. I just said, I'm going to come back to work. He said, no problem, you got your job. So I was okay. But then the phone rang and it was Charlie Hodge. And Charlie said, hey man, we're going to go to the movies at the Memphian tonight and Elvis wants you to call the projectionist and get the movie set up. I said, Charlie, I can't do that. Elvis fired me today. No, man, no. I said, yeah, I was there. I'm pretty sure he fired me. I'll call you back. So he hangs up. A couple hours go by. Phone rings. And when Elvis would call, he would never say, hey, Sam, how's Louise? How the kid? Wasn't that? It's me. Middle of the night, first time he called me, hello, it's me. I hang up. Calls right back, hey man, don't hang up, I told you it was me, So I learned his voice, that's who just say, it's me. So he called me and said, it's me. I said, yeah, Elvis. I said, how you doing? He said, I'm good. He said, look, I never say I'm sorry. And he didn't. Elvis just wouldn't, he couldn't apologize to a man, for sure. He never said I'm sorry. But he said, I want you to stay and I want to talk to you about it. And I said, okay. So I went back to Graceland and he's upstairs in his pajamas, and we talked for an hour. And I finally just told him, I said, look, I want to come back, but this is not the last time we'll talk about this. You need to understand that this is something that I think you needed to change in your life, and I want to be a part of that. So, and he just said, well, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want to hear this anymore. And in my mind, I'm thinking, if my pride swells up and I just quit and walk away, who's there to remind him? And I knew that I would tell him from time to time. I knew I would. And I didn't know if anybody else would. Maybe they would. But I stayed for that purpose. So I went back to work for him and worked for him until he died.
Do you know what made him take the pills? Of course, he was very interested in becoming a doctor himself, maybe because he knew the medicine book line by line. But what made him take them? Was it because he wanted to escape from a miserable life, as somebody has said he has been?
Stig, if I could answer that, we could solve dependency across the scale for most people around the world. But I think it depends on the person. I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. But he did take them. And he believed that he needed them, and it's a shame that he believed that way. But he did believe that, and he took and he did have a physician's desk reference, and he did memorize it line by line, and he knew exactly what he was taking and when he took it. And I don't believe it was suicide. I mean, some people say that. I think it was just a polypharmacy, type of thing, but that's probably enough said about that. I don't like to dwell on that because that's one of the negatives about Elvis's life. It is also one of the things that's very subjective within a human being. How do you know why people do what they do. It's sort of like, why did you fall in love with that person as opposed to another person, you know? Why do you like red wine instead of white? Why do you drink? You know, I don't know. But I don't think Elvis took drugs to escape. I will tell you this, and this only, he told me that when he went into the Army, that he didn't drink and he didn't take anything. But when he went into the Army in the 50s, the American Army was in Germany, and they were facing the Russians. And the Russians had, which is all true, Russians had tanks and everything, and there was a real threat during the Cold War that the Russians would just sweep across Western Europe. And the Americans had tank divisions there, and Elvis was in a tank division. And they would send him out on maneuvers, and they would give him amphetamines. They would give them to all the soldiers to stay awake. And they would sit in those cold tanks in position 2 and 3 days at a time, awake. And to be awake, the Army issued amphetamines to their soldiers, which they did do. Historically, you can get this from the Freedom of Information Act. The U.S. Army did do that. And he had an addictive personality. His mother, Gladys, was an alcoholic. And it sort of ran in the family, that addictive personality. And Elvis took those pills, and guess what? He liked them. And then he went to Hollywood, and he wanted to party all night and do the movies in the day, so he kept taking the pills. And he basically told me he took pills from the Army days all the way through. He just got addicted to them.
And actually he kept away from alcohol because his mother had problems with it.
I think so. He also just didn't like the taste.
No.
Yeah, didn't like the taste. Another question? A happier question? Don't be a downer, man. Come on.
I don't know if it's a happier question or just a, you know, were there any real serious security breaches that you could tell us about?
Well, I couldn't tell you about them. So. You know, mostly, to be honest with you, it was logistics. It was moving Elvis around, which I was trained to do, and Dick Grove was trained to do. We're both police officers. So we had been trained in dignitary protection and crowd control and that type of thing. So what we did is we set up ingress and egress, entrance and exits to arenas differently. And, you know, we never had, like, if this were the stage, we would never have this, where you could start there where Stig is and make a running jump and get here. It would be a maze, a crisscross. And so we would set the arena seating that way. And, you know, we did little things like that to avoid a problem, as opposed to getting there and then when they got there, you know, smacking them or hurting somebody. I always felt like if I had to put my hands on somebody, I had failed in some way in planning. So we that was the way we looked at it. So honestly, the last couple of years, we didn't have a lot of instances like that. There was one time where a guy jumped on the stage in Nassau, New York, Nassau County, and he had gotten around a police officer, and he jumped on the stage, on the edge of the stage, and he pulled out a knife, and it was one of those linoleum hook blade knife, you know? And the police officers, and we were all very concerned, and the police officers were pulling their gun, and all of a sudden Ed Parker stepped out from behind the curtain, bam, and hit him with an elbow, and that was it. They dragged him off. But, you know, who knows what that would have been, but we played Silverdome New Year's Eve in Pontiac, Michigan. And there was a guy who literally had escaped from a mental institution. He was crazy. And he had been a sniper in the U.S. Army. And he was trained. And his ideation was he wanted to kill Elvis. So we knew that. And that was the night they wanted Elvis to wear a bulletproof vest. And Sonny was there. And I always remember Sonny telling this story about how he told Elvis about it. And Sonny was like, you know, 250 pounds, big guy. And Elvis wouldn't wear the bulletproof vest. So Sonny says, well, I'll tell you what now. He said, we got it set up to where if the shot comes out, the light man will cut the lights. The place will go dark. You hit the deck, and I'll cover you. Elvis says, what do you mean by you'll cover me? He said, well, you know, I'll jump on you like the Secret Service does and protect you with my body. And he said, hell, man, I'd rather get shot at than have you jump on me. So we had some things like that happen. And one night in Las Vegas, we had these guys that jumped on the stage, and one of them had a cane. There was a sword in the cane, and their story was they were drinking, and they wanted, you know about this, you've heard this, they were going to give Elvis a gift, but, you know, a fight broke out, and then there was one night where there was a the menu where they crossed Elvis's face out and says, "Tonight you die." And Baron Hilton said he didn't have to go on stage, but he did. And and during the show, somebody in the office, the show, it's dark and Elvis is up there, and somebody gets real dark and somebody says, "Hey Elvis!" And he went, doesn't cry, kind of got sideways to make his narrow. "Yeah, sing Hound Dog." And it's the fastest version of Hound Dog I ever heard. So, yeah, but mostly it was women with fingernails that long. Right? In the 70s, you know? And they would just crowd up, and Elvis, there's a lot of pictures. Elvis had Band-Aids on his hands, and he did put them on to hold the rings on, but he also had multiple cuts on his hands. People don't realize that, but he almost always had like little cuts, little infection cuts, and he would put Madison on them and Band-Aids around them, because when he took that scarf off and handed it, 30 women grabbed for one scarf, and it'd scratch his hands. And so we had those problems, and one night they pulled him off the stage, and we had to get an audience and get him back on the stage. So from then on, we started holding his leg. He would get to the edge of a stage during a scarf sequence song. And in fact, there's one of these pictures in here where I missed his signals, and that was in Southern Indiana in '76. And he would put his knee in my back and do this, and I'd move over, and he'd step up beside me, and I'd hold his leg so you couldn't pull him off. And he'd throw scars out. Well, that night, that's the picture right there. I missed every signal. Every signal. Yeah, so thank you. My lovely assistant. Babette.
Yeah, Babette.
That's right. Ladies, he's not wearing underwear. So anyway. It's a little too much information.
He's not going to be your friend anymore.
He left him in Hawaii.
Okay.
So, that's another story.
Last question, everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. But anyway, so anyway, he pushed me this way, that way, and he couldn't get to the edge of the audience. So he took his scarf off and he wrapped it around my neck and leaned down like he was going to kiss me on the head. I didn't see this. I'm looking at the audience, and all of a sudden, about 30 women reach up and pull this scarf, and they almost choked me to death. They almost pulled me off the stage.